What did the church in early modernity teach about the Jews? Throughout early modernity, the magisterium and saints made it very clear that the Jews were the enemies of Christians and should be seen as such. The church affirmed the anti-Judaic disciplines of previous councils, created ghettos for the Jews, and expelled them multiple times. Now let's look at the passages from these magisterial documents and saints to see what they say. On July 14, 1555, Pope Paul IV published the papal bull Cum Nimis Absurdum, saying, "Since it is completely senseless and inappropriate to be in a situation where Christian piety allows the Jews, whose guilt, all of their own doing, has condemned them to eternal slavery, access to our society, and even to live among us, indeed they are without gratitude to Christians, as instead of thanks for gracious treatment, they return invective, and among themselves, instead of the slavery which they deserve, they manage to claim superiority. We, who recently learned that these very Jews have insolently invaded Rome from a number of the papal states, territories, and domains, to the extent that not only have they mingled with Christians, even when close to their churches, and wearing no identifying garments, but to dwell in homes, indeed, even in the more noble dwellings of the states, territories, and domains which they lingered, conducting business from their houses and in the streets and dealing in real estate. They even have nurses and housemaids and other Christians as hired servants. And they would dare to perpetuate a wide variety of other dishonorable things, contemptuous of the very name Christian, considering that the Church of Rome tolerates these very Jews, evidence of the true Christian faith, and to this end we declare that they, won over by the piety and kindness of the sea, should at long last recognize their erroneous ways and should lose no time in seeing the true light of the Catholic faith, and thus to agree that while they persist in their errors, realizing that they are slaves because of their deeds, whereas Christians have been freed through our Lord Jesus Christ, and that it is unwarranted for it to appear that the sons of free women serve the sons of maids." Pope Paul IV then commanded 15 directives. 1. The Jews were to be segregated into their own ghetto in Rome and wherever else they dwell. 2. The Jews could only have one synagogue in any of their dwelling places. 3. The Jews were to wear Jewish hats and yellow stars in public. 4. The Jews were forbidden to have Christian nurses, maid servants, and wet nurses. 5. The Jews couldn't work or have work done on Sundays or Catholic feast days. 6. The Jews couldn't incriminate Christians nor promulgate false or forged agreements. 7. The Jews couldn't play, eat, or fraternize with Christians. 8. The Jews couldn't use any language other than Latin or Italian in any legally recognized documents with Christians. 9. The Jews were limited to the trade of rag picking and were not to trade in grain, barley, or any other commodity essential to human welfare. 10. The Jews who were physicians were not to attend or treat any Christians. 11. The Jews were not to be addressed as superiors even by poor Christians. 12. The Jews had severe restrictions enforced on their loan practices. 13. The Jews were to adhere to all statutes regarding the primacy of Christians. 14. Disobeying these directives would be treated as a crime punishable by judicial authority. 15. The disciplines of this papal bull overrode any other prior contrary magisterium disciplines. On February 26, 1569, Pope St. Pius V decreed in Hebrorum Gens, "The Jewish people fell from the heights because of their faithlessness and condemned their Redeemer to a shameful death. Their godlessness has assumed such forms that for the salvation of our own people, it becomes necessary to prevent their disease. Besides usury, through which the Jews everywhere have sucked dry the property of impoverished Christians, they are accomplices of thieves and robbers, and the most damaging aspect of the matter is that they allure the unsuspecting through magical incantation, superstition, and witchcraft to the synagogue of Satan and boast of being able to predict the future. We have carefully investigated how this revolting sect abuses the name of Christ and how harmful they are to those whose life is threatened by their deceit. On account of these and other serious matters, and because of the gravity of the crimes which increase day to day more and more, we order that within 90 days all Jews in our entire earthly realm of justice, and all towns, districts, and places must depart these regions. After this time limit shall all the present or in the future who dwell or wander in that city or other already mentioned be affected, their property confiscated and handed over to Ciscus, and they shall become slaves of the Roman Church, live in perpetual servitude, and the Roman Church shall have the same rights over them as the remaining worldly lords over slaves and property." Pope Clement VIII in the papal bull Caesarea et Obdurata re-expelled the Jews from the papal states in 1593 after Pope Sixtus V let them back in 1586 because the laxity of Pope Sixtus V resulted in Jews taking advantage of Christians. Yes, the Jews have been expelled from a lot of cities and countries over the past couple of millennia. I have seen lists that suggest that the Jews were expelled from countries 109 times, 1,030 times, and even 1,043 times throughout history. On June 14, 1751, Pope Benedict XIV, in his encyclical A Quo Primum on Judaism in Poland, wrote, "Another threat to Christians has been the influence of Jewish faithlessness. This influence was strong because Christians and Jews were living in the same cities and towns. Because the Jews control businesses selling liquor and even wine, they are therefore allowed to supervise the collection of public revenues. They have also gained control of inns, bankrupt estates, village, and public land, by means of which they have subjugated poor Christian farmers. The Jews are cruel taskmasters, not only working the farmers harshly and forcing them to carry excessive loads, but also whipping them for punishment. So it has come about that these poor farmers are the subjects of the Jews, submissive to their will and power. Furthermore, although the power to punish lies with the Christian official, he must comply with the commands of the Jews and inflict the punishments they desire. If he doesn't, he would lose his posts. Therefore, the tyrannical orders of the Jews have to be carried out. In addition to the harm done to the Christians in these regards, other unreasonable manners can result in even greater loss and danger. The most serious is that some households of the great have employed a Jew as, quote, superintendent of the household, unquote. In this capacity, they not only administer domestic and economic matters, but they also ceaselessly exhibit and flaunt authority over the Christians they are living with. It is now even commonplace for Christians and Jews to intermingle anywhere. But what is even less comprehensible is that the Jews fearlessly keep Christians of both sexes in their houses as their domestics, bound to their service. Furthermore, by means of their particular practice of commerce, they amass a great store of money, and then by an exorbitant rate of interest utterly destroy the wealth and inheritance of Christians. Even if they borrow money from Christians at heavy and undue interest with their synagogues as surety, it is obvious to anyone who thinks about it that they do so to employ the money borrowed from Christians in their commercial dealings. This enables them to make enough profit to pay the agreed interest and simultaneously increase their own store. At the same time, they gain as many defenders of their synagogues and themselves as they have creditors. We adopt the same norm of action as did the Roman pontiffs who were our venerable predecessors. Alexander III forbade Christians under heavy penalties to accept permanent domestic service under Jews. Quote, "Let them not continually devote themselves to the service of Jews for a wage," unquote. He sets out the reason for this in the Decretal, quote, "Because Jewish ways do not harmonize in any way with ours, and they could easily turn the minds of the simple to their own superstitions and faithlessness through continual intercourse and unceasing acquaintance," unquote. Innocent III, after saying that Jews were being received by Christians in their cities, warns that the method and condition of this reception should guard against their repaying the benefit with evil doing. Quote, "They, on being admitted to our acquaintance in a spirit of mercy, repay us," the popular proverb says, "as the mouse in the wallet, the snake in the lap, and the fire in the bosom usually repay their hosts," unquote. The same Pope stated that it was fitting for Jews to serve Christians rather than vice versa, and added, quote, "Let not the sons of the free woman be servants of the sons of the handmaid, but as servants rejected by their Lord, for whose death they evilly conspired. Let them realize that the result of this deed is to make them servants of those whose Christ's death made free," unquote, as we read in his Decretal. Likewise, in the Decretal under the same heading, he forbids the promotion of Jews to public office, quote, "Forbidding Jews to be promoted to public offices, since in such circumstances they may be very dangerous to Christians," unquote. Innocent IV, also in writing to St. Louis, King of France, who intended to drive the Jews beyond the boundaries of his kingdom, approves of this plan, since the Jews gave very little heed to the regulations made by the Apostolic See in the regard. Quote, "Since we strive with all our heart for the salvation of the souls, we grant you full power by the authority of this letter to expel the Jews, particularly since we have learned that they do not obey the said statutes issued by the see against them," unquote. You will recall the statutes and prescripts of the synods of your predecessors. They always entered in their constitutions every measure concerning the Jews which was sanctioned and ordained by the Roman pontiffs. The essence of the difficulty, however, is that either the sanctions of the synods are forgotten or they are not put into effect. To you then, venerable brothers, passes the task of renewing those sanctions. You will be able to give these orders and commands easily and confidently, and that neither your property nor your privileges are hired to Jews. Furthermore, you do no business with them, and you neither lend them money nor borrow from them. Thus you will be free from and unaffected by dealings with them. In the 18th century, doctor of the church St. Alphonsus Liguori wrote in The Passion and the Death of Jesus Christ these words: "Poor Jews, you invoked a dreadful curse upon your own heads in saying, 'His blood be upon us and our children.' And that curse, miserable race, you carry upon you to this day, and to the end of time you shall endure the chastisement of that innocent blood." I think after hearing all of this, it is clear that the church has always taught that the Jews that rejected Christ are guilty of deicide and cursing themselves. Objection. But why was the church so critical to these poor Jews? Answer. Well, there is good reason that the church and the saints were strongly anti-Jewish. As you could probably tell from what the saints say, some of the canons of the councils mentioned and the reasons given by these popes in their magisterium, the Jews, being the wealthy bankers and merchants of the Middle Ages, took advantage of Christians by charging heavy usury on loans, turning Christians into debt slaves, and many times literal slaves, thus the canons that condemn Jews owning Christian slaves. Moreover, Jews have a hostility to Christians that goes back to the 1st century and literally see us as animals that they can do whatever they want with. This is their quote-unquote religion, as I will soon show you in the next episode.